thing that affected his health the most is his obesity. He had increasingly a problem with his legs. He also suffered from constipation. He developed a lot of ulcers. He may have had some problems with insulin deficiency.
After nearly 500 years of speculation, DNA evidence has finally uncovered the truth about King Henry VIII's death, and what researchers found buried in his bloodline is darker than anyone imagined. Modern science reveals a genetic time bomb that slowly destroyed his mind, turning England's Golden Prince into one of history's most paranoid monsters. This is shocking. The man who executed 2 wives and terrorized a nation wasn't just cruel. He was being consumed from the inside out by a blood disorder so rare that only 9% of people carry it. Nearly 500 years later, the truth about King Henry VIII's death is finally emerging thanks to DNA evidence. And it's bad. The Golden Prince who became a monster. Henry VIII wasn't always a monster. When he became king in 1509 at the age of 17, he was everything England could hope for. 6 feet, 2 inches tall, athletic, charismatic, and devastatingly handsome. He could joust with the best knights, compose music, and charm anyone who entered his presence. England had finally found its Renaissance prince. But by 1547, when he died at 55, he'd become unrecognizable. He weighed nearly 400 pounds, his legs were covered in oozing ulcers that never healed, and he had a temper so legendary that courtiers feared for their lives. He'd executed 2 wives, sent thousands to their deaths, and ruled with paranoid brutality that shocked even his own era. What happened to transform him so completely? For centuries, historians blamed power, suggesting absolute authority corrupts absolutely. Others whispered about syphilis, diabetes, or simple personality flaws. But none of these theories explained the pattern fully. Why did multiple wives suffer repeated miscarriages? And why did his mental state deteriorate so dramatically after age 40? The truth lay hidden in something microscopic, coded into his very DNA, something that had been killing him slowly since conception, and, in 2011, researchers finally exposed it. But what they discovered raised an uncomfortable question. Was Henry VIII a tyrant by choice, or was something far more sinister controlling him all along? To answer these questions, let's uncover how a single accident triggered such a catastrophic decline. January 24th, 1536, the accident that changed everything. Greenwich Palace, January 24th, 1536. King Henry VIII, 44 years old and still relatively fit, charges down the tilt yard in full armor. Then disaster strikes. His horse stumbles and crashes, crushing Henry beneath approximately 200 pounds of metal. He was unconscious for 2 hours. When he finally woke up, everyone celebrated. The king had survived. But had he really? Within months, everything changed. His personality began shifting. He became more irritable, more suspicious, and more prone to explosive rage. His legendary leg ulcers started developing, festering wounds that would torture him for 11 years. These weren't ordinary injuries. They were deep, chronic ulcers that oozed constantly, filling the air with the stench of rotting flesh. Tudor physicians tried poultices, cauterization, and draining. Nothing worked. But here's the truly chilling detail. Just 11 days after Henry's accident, his pregnant queen, Anne Boleyn, miscarried a male heir. The timing seemed like a cruel coincidence. The loss devastated Henry and sealed Anne's fate. Within 4 months, she'd be accused of adultery and treason. By May, she was dead, beheaded on Tower Green. For centuries, historians debated whether the shock of Henry's accident triggered Anne's miscarriage. But nobody asked the more important question: why did this keep happening? Anne wasn't the first queen to lose babies with Henry. Catherine of Aragon had suffered the same heartbreaking pattern. What if the accident didn't cause anything? What if it simply revealed something sinister that had been lurking in Henry's blood all along? The curse in the blood. Kell positive revealed. In 2011, bioarchaeologist Katarina Whitley and historian Kyra Kramer published research that shocked the academic world. King Henry VIII, they proposed, likely carried a rare blood type called Kell positive. Only about 9% of the Caucasian population has it. Most people have never heard of it. But for a king desperate to produce male heirs, it was a death sentence. Here's the nightmare scenario. When a Kell positive father impregnates a Kell negative mother, there's a 50-50 chance each baby will be Kell positive. The first pregnancy usually goes fine, and the baby comes to term healthy. But during birth, some of the baby's blood crosses into the mother's bloodstream. Her immune system encounters these foreign Kell antigens and creates antibodies to destroy them. In every subsequent pregnancy with a Kell positive baby, those antibodies attack. They cross the placenta and begin destroying the developing fetus's red blood cells. The baby becomes anemic. Fluid builds up in its tissues. Its spleen enlarges desperately, trying to compensate. Heart failure follows. Most die between 24 and 28 weeks, around the third trimester, exactly when Henry's queens kept losing their children. Catherine of Aragon's reproductive history reads like a medical tragedy. She carried at least 6 pregnancies with Henry. Some historians argue it could have been as many as 8. Her first pregnancy in 1510 resulted in a stillborn daughter. Her second, in 1511, produced a son named Henry, who lived only 52 days before dying. The nation mourned. Then came miscarriage after miscarriage. Her third pregnancy ended in either a miscarriage or stillbirth in 1513. Her fourth pregnancy in 1514 produced a son who died within hours of birth. Her fifth pregnancy in 1516 finally produced a living, healthy child, Princess Mary, who would later become Mary I. But subsequent pregnancies in 1517 and 1518 ended in stillbirth and miscarriage. The pattern is textbook Kell incompatibility. The first few pregnancies show increasing fetal distress. Then occasionally, randomly, a baby survives, either because they inherited Catherine's Kell-negative blood type or through sheer chance. But the majority die in the third trimester from the exact complications the Kell antibody response causes. The pattern shown by Anne Boleyn was even more clinically precise. Her first pregnancy with Henry produced Elizabeth in 1533. Born healthy, no complications whatsoever. This is exactly what you'd expect in a first pregnancy with Kell incompatibility, as the mother hasn't been sensitized yet. But her second pregnancy in 1534 ended in miscarriage. Her third pregnancy, the one that occurred just days after Henry's 1536 jousting accident, produced a male fetus that died at about 15 to 16 weeks, though some accounts suggest it could have been later in the pregnancy. What makes the DNA evidence so compelling is that this pattern repeated across different women. If the problem was with the mothers, if Catherine or Anne had individual reproductive issues, you wouldn't see the same pattern. But when the same man fathers children with multiple women, and those women all experience the same type of pregnancy losses, the evidence points directly to the father. Modern medicine now thoroughly understands Kell disease. We can test for it, we can treat it with blood transfusions in utero, We can monitor pregnancies carefully and deliver babies early if necessary. But in Henry's time, there was nothing. No blood typing, no understanding of antibodies or immune responses, and no way to save those babies. They just died, again and again, and nobody knew why. The psychological impact on Henry must have been catastrophic. Imagine watching pregnancy after pregnancy fail. Imagine the hope each time a wife announced she was with child, followed by the devastating loss months later. Imagine being told by everyone, physicians, priests, advisors, that this was God's judgment on you, that you were cursed, that your soul was damned. Henry interpreted these losses through a religious lens because that was the only framework available to him. He believed God was punishing him. First, for marrying his brother's widow. Catherine had briefly been married to Henry's older brother Arthur before Arthur's death. Then for breaking with Rome, then for various other sins. He became increasingly obsessed with finding the right wife who could give him sons. He even executed 2 wives, partially because of their failure to produce male heirs. But the truth? The DNA evidence finds a pattern so clear that it explains Henry's increasing desperation and violence. It wasn't just bad luck or divine punishment. His own blood was killing his children. Every marriage, every hope, every pregnancy was doomed before it even began. And he had absolutely no way of knowing it. How does a man stay sane watching his heirs die again and again, never understanding why? The answer is simple: he doesn't. McLeod syndrome, when DNA attacks the mind. The Kell-positive blood type explained the dead babies. But what explained Henry's transformation into a paranoid tyrant? The researchers proposed something even more sinister: McLeod syndrome. This is an exceptionally rare genetic disorder carried on the X chromosome that almost exclusively affects men. It typically begins manifesting around age 40. The timing is chilling. Henry was 44 when his personality began its dramatic shift. McLeod syndrome attacks on multiple fronts simultaneously. It causes heart disease, progressive muscle weakness, and movement disorders. But the psychological symptoms are the most devastating: paranoia, anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, and personality changes so severe that patients become completely different people. After 1536, courtiers noticed the transformation. The jovial, charismatic young king who loved music and dancing was disappearing. In his place emerged someone darker, more suspicious, and more willing to execute people on the slightest suspicion. His decision-making became erratic and brutal. Anne Boleyn experienced this horror firsthand. Henry had moved heaven and earth to marry her, breaking with Rome and divorcing Catherine. He'd been obsessed with her for years. Then suddenly, his love transformed into murderous hatred. He didn't just divorce her, he accused her of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, and witchcraft. It's unlikely that any of it was true, but Henry's mind was unraveling. The pattern continued with terrifying consistency. Catherine Howard, his 5th wife, was beheaded for alleged adultery. Thomas More, his longtime friend, was executed for political defiance. Thomas Cromwell, who'd served him faithfully, was beheaded on flimsy charges. Hundreds of others went to the scaffold as Henry's paranoia spiraled. This wasn't just tyranny. This was a genetic disorder literally destroying his brain. The truth about King Henry VIII's transformation is written in his DNA, and it explains why a Renaissance prince became a Renaissance monster. The ulcers that never healed. While Henry's mind deteriorated, his body staged its own rebellion. Those leg ulcers that developed after his 1536 accident had resulted in 11 years of constant torture. Deep, suppurating wounds on both legs, filled with pus and dead tissue that never, ever healed. The smell alone was reportedly overwhelming. Courtiers could tell when the king approached by the stench preceding him. Tudor physicians tried everything, including herbal poultices and repeated draining. When nothing else worked, they resorted to cauterization, burning infected tissue with red-hot irons, without an anesthetic. Imagine the King of England screaming in agony as physicians burned his flesh. Then, within days or weeks, the ulcers would return. The cycle never ended. What caused these hellish wounds? The jousting accident certainly contributed to massive blunt force trauma, damaging blood vessels in his legs, but McLeod syndrome likely made everything worse. The disorder affects muscle function and compromises circulation. Henry's legs probably received poor blood flow, meaning even minor wounds couldn't heal properly. Add his increasing obesity, he was gaining weight rapidly after being forced to stop exercising, and you have a recipe for chronic, untreatable ulcers. The pain must have been excruciating, constant, and all-consuming. And here's the terrible irony. His doctors were making it worse. Tudor fashion included tight garters worn below the knee to hold up hose. These constricted blood flow further, turning manageable wounds into festering disasters. Henry's own vanity and the fashion of his era were literally killing him. Some historians believe Henry's increasing reliance on alcohol and food was partially self-medication. What else could he do? In 16th century England, there were no antibiotics, no proper pain management, and no surgical interventions that could help. He was trapped in his deteriorating body, watching it betray him day after day, with no understanding of why. The weight of a dying king. As Henry's health collapsed, so did his body. The athletic young king who once hunted for hours became something else entirely. After his 1536 accident, Henry's active lifestyle ended. The leg ulcers made exercise excruciating. His weight made mobility increasingly difficult, but he never adjusted his eating habits. Renaissance banquets were legendary feasts featuring multiple courses: swan, peacock, venison, boar, beef, mutton, countless pies and pastries, jellies and custards, all washed down with wine and ale. A typical Tudor feast could include dozens of dishes served over several hours. Henry had always eaten heartily. It was expected of a king to demonstrate wealth and power through lavish consumption. But when he was young and active, his body could handle it. He jousted, hunted, played tennis, and danced for hours. He burned the calories almost as fast as he consumed them. Now, unable to exercise, those same meals became an engine of destruction. The weight gain created a vicious cycle that modern medicine recognizes, but Tudor physicians couldn't understand. More weight meant worse circulation to his extremities. Worse circulation meant the ulcers couldn't heal properly because wounds need good blood flow to repair themselves. The constant pain and immobility led to depression and more eating for comfort. Food became one of his few remaining pleasures. More weight followed. His doctors were helpless. They didn't understand metabolism, calories, cardiovascular health, or the complex relationship between obesity and disease. Contemporary accounts describe Henry's appearance in his final years with barely concealed horror. The Venetian ambassador reported that the king had to be carried everywhere and could barely stand without support. His face became bloated and ruddy. His breathing was labored and wheezing. Reports describe him sleeping, sitting up in a specially designed chair because lying down made him feel like he was suffocating. A classic symptom of congestive heart failure and sleep apnea, both common in severely obese patients. Modern medical experts examining historical records believe Henry developed a cascade of obesity-related conditions. Type 2 diabetes was almost certainly present. His extreme thirst, frequent urination, and slow-healing wounds are all classic symptoms. Hypertension would have followed naturally from his weight and diet. His kidneys were likely failing, unable to process the metabolic waste his massive body produced. He also developed gout, a painful form of arthritis caused by uric acid buildup, making even the slightest movement of his feet agonizing. Due to his extreme weight, his heart was put under tremendous strain. Imagine a muscle designed to pump blood through a 200-pound body suddenly having to serve a 400-pound frame. Every heartbeat required more effort. His heart likely enlarged, weakened, and began to fail. A condition called cardiomyopathy. Fluid would have built up in his lungs and extremities, making breathing difficult and worsening the circulation problems in his legs. The psychological toll was equally devastating. Think about the transformation. Henry had been magnificent, tall, strong, athletic, and considered one of the most handsome princes in Europe. Foreign ambassadors wrote glowing descriptions of his physical prowess. Women competed for his attention. Men envied his strength. Now he was a mountain of flesh, immobile, in constant pain, and dependent on servants for basic functions. He couldn't walk without assistance. He couldn't dress himself. He couldn't even control his own body anymore. The humiliation must have been unbearable for a man who'd once defined himself through physical achievement. Is it any wonder his paranoia and cruelty intensified? He was watching himself disintegrate in real time, helpless to stop it, while his deteriorating brain, already being destroyed by McLeod syndrome, couldn't process any of it rationally. The combination of physical pain, psychological trauma, and neurological deterioration created the perfect storm. Some historians suggest Henry's obesity was a form of slow suicide, that on some unconscious level, he was eating himself to death because he couldn't bear his reality. Others argue it was simply the inevitable result of royal excess meeting medical ignorance. Either way, the truth is darker than simple gluttony or laziness. Henry's DNA had set him on a collision course with destruction. The McLeod syndrome was destroying his muscle function and metabolism. The chronic pain from his ulcers drove him to seek comfort in food and alcohol. His immobility made weight loss impossible, and nothing in 16th century medicine could have saved him. He was trapped in a body that had become his prison, slowly suffocating under his own weight, waiting for the inevitable end. At his death, Henry VIII weighed between 350 and 400 pounds. His waist measured 54 inches. He was so enormous that special equipment had to be constructed, winches, pulleys, and platforms just to move him from room to room. His coffin had to be specially built and reinforced to handle his massive weight. Tracing the genetic legacy. So, where did this genetic curse originate that had led to the downfall of a once-admired monarch? Researchers traced it back through Henry's maternal line to his great-grandmother, Jacquetta of Luxembourg. Jacquetta was legendary, a duchess who married for love twice, mother to Elizabeth Woodville, who became queen, and rumored to be a witch by her enemies. Whether she practiced witchcraft is debatable, but she definitely passed down something powerful through her bloodline. The evidence is compelling. When researchers examined reproductive patterns among Jacquetta's descendants, they found something remarkable. Her male descendants suffered reproductive difficulties similar to Henry's, while her female descendants were generally reproductively successful. This pattern is exactly what you'd expect if the KEL-positive gene were being passed down through her line. The KEL antigen is inherited. If Jacquetta carried the gene and passed it to her descendants, it would explain not just Henry's problems, but an entire pattern of reproductive failure among Tudor men. Henry's maternal great-grandmother might have unknowingly cursed her male descendants with a blood type that made producing healthy heirs extraordinarily difficult. This wasn't superstition or divine punishment. This was genetics, cold, ruthless, and utterly indifferent to royal ambitions. Henry VIII, desperate to secure his dynasty, was fighting an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't defeat. His own DNA was betraying him. Every time he married, every time he hoped for a son, his blood was already preparing to destroy that hope. The paranoia, the executions, and the desperate marriages all make horrifying sense when you understand he was watching his children die again and again, never knowing why. The curse in his blood was driving him mad, and modern science has finally revealed the source. Why other theories failed. For centuries, historians proposed alternative explanations. Syphilis was popular, the disease was rampant in Renaissance Europe, and its symptoms included personality changes and physical deterioration. But the evidence doesn't support it. Syphilis causes specific neurological symptoms that Henry never exhibited. His children showed no signs of congenital syphilis. The progression doesn't match. Others suggested Cushing's syndrome caused by excess cortisol production. It can cause weight gain, personality changes, and poor wound healing. But Cushing's has other hallmark symptoms, dramatic facial changes, and severe muscle wasting that Henry never developed. Type 2 diabetes? Certainly possible, and likely secondary to his obesity. But diabetes alone doesn't explain the reproductive failures across multiple wives or the dramatic personality transformation. Some historians argued it was simply age, stress, and absolute power corrupting. Perhaps Henry's cruelty was just a political necessity in a brutal era. But that explanation ignores the medical evidence. It ignores the pattern. People who knew him remarked on how dramatically he changed after the age of 40. This wasn't gradual aging, it was transformation. The beauty of the KEL-positive blood type and MacLeod syndrome theory is how elegantly it explains everything. The reproductive failures, the first healthy pregnancy, was followed by tragic miscarriages with each wife, the sudden personality shift, the movement disorders, the ulcers that wouldn't heal, the cardiovascular problems, the paranoia, and the cognitive decline. Every piece fits. Could we ever prove it definitively? That's the tragedy. Without genetic material from Henry himself, we can't perform DNA testing to 100% confirm the KEL antigen or MacLeod syndrome mutation. His body is buried in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, and there's virtually no chance researchers would be allowed to exhume him. But sometimes, circumstantial evidence is enough. When every symptom, every historical account, and every documented tragedy aligns with a single genetic explanation, the truth reveals itself. DNA evidence finds the truth about King Henry VIII's death, and it's bad. By January 1547, King Henry VIII was dying, 55 years old, and ravaged by decades of genetic warfare waged by his own body against itself. His obesity had triggered congestive heart failure. His kidneys were failing. Modern analysis suggests uncontrolled diabetes and severe hypertension. His mental state had deteriorated to the point where paranoia ruled his final days. On January 27th, he developed a fever. In an age before antibiotics, infection from chronic leg ulcers, was likely the immediate cause. His massive body, already stressed to its absolute limits, simply couldn't fight anymore. He died on January 28, 1547, in the early hours at Whitehall Palace. But here's what makes this so devastatingly tragic. Henry VIII never knew. He never understood that his own DNA was destroying him from within. He blamed his wives for failing to produce sons, executing 2 of them for it. He never knew that his blood was killing their children. He interpreted his physical pain and mental anguish as God's punishment, never suspecting a genetic disorder was eating away at his brain. The DNA evidence finds the truth about King Henry VIII's death, and it's bad. Really bad, because it means everything we thought we knew needs reconsideration. Was he a monster? Yes. He executed thousands, terrorized England, and ruled with brutal paranoia. But was he also a victim? Was his tyranny partially the result of a brain being destroyed by MacLeod syndrome? When he sent Anne Boleyn to her death, was he acting with free will, or was his decision-making already compromised by genetic deterioration? The answers provided by the DNA theory don't excuse his actions. People with genetic disorders aren't absolved of moral responsibility, but it complicates our understanding. Henry VIII wasn't just a tyrant drunk on power. He was a man watching his body disintegrate, his mind unravel, and his children die again and again, all while having no framework to understand why. The pain, both physical and psychological, must have been unimaginable. After nearly 500 years, modern genetic research has exposed what historians and moralists could never see. The truth was in his blood all along. The rare KEL-positive antigen is killing his heirs. The MacLeod syndrome is destroying his brain. The cascade of medical catastrophes that transformed England's Golden Prince into history's monster. This is shocking because it means Henry VIII was fighting an invisible enemy from birth, and he never had a chance of winning the battle. The truth about King Henry VIII's death isn't just about how he died. It's about how his DNA sentenced him to a life of suffering, paranoia, and violence that he could never escape. History rarely offers clean answers, but after nearly 500 years, the truth about King Henry VIII is finally emerging. Complex, devastating, and impossible to ignore. If we could prove definitively through DNA testing that Henry VIII suffered from MacLeod syndrome, would that change things? If we could prove that his worst actions were partially the result of a genetic disorder destroying his brain, would it change how we judge him? What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.